Well, I'd like to welcome you to the video on lesson planning. Today we're going to look at the variables that affect lesson planning and describe the basic components of a lesson plan. We're going to look at what drives every lesson plan that is ever taught, and those are the objectives. And typically we find three types of objectives, the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. And so we're going to look at those taxonomies, the levels of writing to those three levels. We're going to distinguish between two types of objectives, Runyan's and Maker's objectives, and then how to use the internet again so you never have to write your own lesson plan again. So let's get started. You know, sometimes we make the best plans we can. I remember coaching that a lot of times we would plan for a week before we went into a game with a certain type of defense, a certain type of offense, and we get started with the game. And sometimes the plans that you lay, even in coaching, just as in teaching, sometimes just don't work out. You sometimes just get stuffed, no matter how good a plan you got for that easy layup. So what are those variables that could block you? What are those variables that do affect lesson planning? Let's take them one at a time. First off, teachers are one of the biggest variables in affecting your amount of lesson planning. Typically, the more experience you have, the less you tend to plan. Our first-year teachers spend quite a percentage of time planning lessons, working kids from bell to bell and getting those lesson plans down to where it fits their class. The first couple of years are spent in perfecting those lesson plans to fit the children that sit before them. Also, the personality of the teacher. Some are more global, who have more of a tendency to wing it. Many are more concrete, sequential, and like to have everything planned, all their I's dotted, T's crossed. They wouldn't dare go into a classroom without knowing what they're going to do every 5 minutes. So it depends a lot on personality. It depends a lot on how long you've taught. Secondly, the level of students that you have will impinge upon the amount of planning and the types of plans that you do. You might think that a kindergarten teacher doesn't need to plan, but probably that is one of the most important levels and jobs of a kindergarten teacher. You've got to have every minute taken with those youngsters from bell to bell, from first bell of the day to the last. And if you don't, total chaos will ensue. So, yeah, but the types of plans that you develop will depend upon the type of students that you have. And also the learning context. That is the curriculum that your school district asks that you teach, depending on whether you're in science or math, reading. Those, in a lot of times, are your test areas, and you have to spend an inordinate amount of time teaching to the test. So your curriculum, the textbooks that you have, the mapping that is done in your school district will all affect what you get to do in lesson planning. And then time is a factor. The younger you are, the more time you do spend on lesson planning, but yet the less time a lot of times you have. You're usually newly married, and that can impinge upon the home life. If you have children, sometimes that amount of time is just not there at home to get that done. So the amount of time that you have, there are middle schools that believe in teaming, believe in having not only an individual planned time, but also a a team plan time. And sometimes you'll find in a middle school 90 minutes of planning time available per day for teachers. So time, not only in the school day, but after school will play a big part in how much planning gets done. But those are all variables that honestly affect what planning a teacher does. But we do know, research study after research study bears out that planning plays a very important part in a teacher's security going into that classroom, the confidence that they will have as they begin the day, and the manner in which the class is taught. That is, the more you plan, the better it is when it comes to your confidence walking into a class. And a lot of times, in the school I taught, I had to drive half an hour to get there. I'd go over my lesson plans in my head as I drive to school. And then as I came back home, it was the time to debrief, to find out and reflect what went right, what went wrong. But either planning on paper or on your head is a big part in your confidence. Well, lesson planning also is important because you just can't wing it. You can't go into a class. I love this little commercial. See if
Some
you can
people
see
like
the
to climb
analogy.
mountains. I like to build planes in the air.
I grew up wanting to be on a plane, wanting to be up this high.
Sometimes the temperature up in altitude will reach 60 below. It's brisk, it's refreshing.
You never know what you're going to come across up here. Canadian geese, mallards,
Owls. These people back here, that's why I come to work. That's why I build airplanes in the sky.
We're not just building a plane here. We're building a dream.
I love this job.
I got a lot of thanks up here. When I look over there and I see that little kid, I look in his eyes, that's all the thanks I need.
Well, lesson plan is a lot like building a dream for the day, and the more of that plane that you've got built, I think the more security and confidence that you're going to have in landing that plane and bringing everybody home. So, a good little analogy. Well, what is it in a lesson plan that begins it all? What directs and gives focus to what's going to be taught? Well, answer is simple. It's the objective. And in writing objectives, we have three domains. The cognitive, which is the knowledge base, the affective area, which is what kids believe or feel, and then the psychomotor, what skills that they would leave with. Three types of objectives that we typically write in lesson plans. Let's take the cognitive. The most known of the taxonomies is Bloom's taxonomy, and he believes that the lowest level of the cognitive domain is knowledge, that is, the kids just know the material, and the highest is evaluation. And to be able to evaluate something, you need to be able to synthesize it, analyze it, apply it, comprehend it, and have the knowledge of what it's about. So they all build upon another. And so looking at those and writing those objectives, there are certain types of verbs that go with typical lesson plans to signify the level. But let's take one at a time. For example, knowledge is simply the lowest level of the cognitive domain. It's remembering the material. It's simply recalling the facts. We in higher ed call it just regurgitation, but it's repeating what you should know. They are the facts, they are the theories, they are the dates, they are the spelling, but it is the exact knowledge base that they need to know. And so we would have, at that level, objectives written. Student would be able to define, describe, identify, list, match, or name. At the second level, once they know what the concept is that you're teaching, then do they really grasp the meaning of it? Can they interpret it? Can they explain it? Can they summarize it? Can they predict an outcome? And so we see words used in the writing objective, students will be able to convert, defend, distinguish, or estimate. Students will be able to explain or generalize or rewrite. Level of comprehension, that is, they just don't recite the facts to you. They can reword it and put it into their own words. They really kind of know what it means. And then third, once they kind of understand it, can they apply it to something? Do they have the ability to use it in a new situation? For example, here we would see terms in the lesson objective. Student will be able to change, compute, will demonstrate. Student will be able to operate, show, use, solve, and the like. But then once they can apply that material to a new situation, then can they break it down into parts? Do they understand how it's all put together, the organization? Can they conclude from it? Can they see relationships to other things? So there are the terms, and our student will be able to distinguish, diagram, outline, relate, or break down, or discriminate. And then once they can analyze it and know its parts, can they make it simple? Can they put the parts together to form a whole new idea? And so there we would use terms in an objective such as students will be able to combine or comply or compose or create or design. And the highest of Bloom's taxonomy is the ability to evaluate, to make value judgments on that material based on the criteria of what they know. And so there we would have the objectives written. Student will be able to appraise, to criticize, to conclude, to discriminate, to contrast, or compare. So a cognitive domain from knowledge to evaluation. And as you teach a lesson, you go through all six of those. And what QPA and other testing agencies want to see more of is teachers moving from the knowledge base to the upper areas of analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. In fact, a lot of times in the educational school system, we see the high school being able to center mainly on what you know and understand the knowledge and comprehension. College looks also at knowledge comprehension, but then will ask that you apply it and analyze it. And then in graduate school, you're in the areas of synthesis and evaluation, and then the highest of the level is creating something new in doctoral school. And so we even see the taxonomy used a lot of times in structuring what's taught in various levels of schooling. Well, let's quiz you a little bit. What would this objective be? Student would be able to identify the capitals of each state. Well, okay, knowledge. A student will be able to interpret the symbols on a weather map. Well, they got to know what the symbols mean, but now they got to apply it. So that's do they understand it? So that's comprehension. A student will be able to compute the miles per gallon for an auto trip. They're going to have to use the formula, know it, understand it, and actually use it to solve something. So application. Student will be able to identify bias in a news story. That is, they're going to have to be able to not only know what bias is and understand it and see how it's applied, but they're going to have to break it down to its parts to see it recognized in a news story. Or 5, students will be able to design an experiment for testing a hypothesis. Again, you're going to have to be able to understand the whole part of it to be able to do something new, more in the synthesis area. And then last, students will be able to discriminate which conclusions are supported by evidence, which would be evaluation. So if you were going to use this, and we do in education, to analyze questioning, what levels of questions on a test, if we simply, in this chapter that you're reading now, ask you to list the 7 instructional variables that enhance learning. simple cognitive regurgitation. What's the text say? And then we might ask you to describe an effective lesson by identifying its instructional characteristics. That is, you would have to be able to know what they are, but also recognize them and see them as they're used. And then in 3, we're going to ask you to apply them. Construct an effective lesson using effective instructional techniques, where you actually have to go and show, well, I understand it, I know it, and I can do it. And then what conclusions would you draw from the science of teaching as presented in this chapter? Well, that would be more analysis, because you're going to be asked to break it down into conclusions. And then to synthesize it, we might ask you to put it all together and make a tip sheet to a beginning teacher using these 7 instructional strategies. And then last, which instructional variables do you find most effective in your teaching there? You're going to have to know what they are, how they're used, and the like, to be able to evaluate, and especially the last part, what other variable would you add? So 5 levels of questioning, all on Bloom's taxonomy. The second area is the affective domain. That is what kids believe, what values they have, and these again are a taxonomy, with the lowest being they're going to listen to you and receive it, to respond to it, to value it in some way, to organize it into their life, and then becoming part of them or not part of them in the characterization. In this domain, affective is first, where it is simply an awareness of that belief or that value or that feeling that you want them to have. They listen to it, they're attentive to it, and our verbs would be, well, students will ask, they choose, they can describe, they can follow, they can give, they can hold, identify, locate, name, point, select, and the like. And then as they know what it is and received it, they're going to respond to it. They're going to react to it. These outcomes then emphasize somewhat compliance, their willingness to respond, their satisfaction of responding. And here, for example, the key words are: a student will assist, aid, comply, conform, discuss, greets, helps, and the likes. But it asking them to respond to it and do it in a positive way. And then the third level is the value that the individual student places on that phenomenon or that behavior. They're moving from simple acceptance of it to more of a commitment, valuing it, of starting to internalize it as something they might believe in, and maybe not always demonstrated, but it could be identified at times. So there you look for keywords like student will be able to demonstrate, differentiate, explain, follow, form, initiate, justify, and the like. And then as it is valued, they start to organize their priorities, rearrange things. They look for the conflicts and how it's going to impinge upon other values that they have, to maybe become part of their value system. They start to compare it, to relate it, and then they're going to accept it or not, the behavior. But here we have words such as students will be able to adhere, to compare, to complete, to defend, to explain, to generalize, to modify. And then the last one is it becomes part of their everyday actions. They internalize these values. They have a value system now that is pretty well pervasive and consistent, predictable in their behavior. And they display it ethically in their everyday practice. And they now are seen as people that believe in that. And this is what they're noted for. So the student acts, that student displays, influences others, modifies, performs, practices. So it becomes part of them. So 5 levels. What might be this level if it was an objective that you're writing? A student will be able to listen attentive. Well, it could be responding. It might best be receiving. They're just going to be able to listen attentively. Then in 2, they're going to ask that they listen and then do something with it. So it's responding to it. So the student will be able to participate in class discussions. And then 3, they'll be able to demonstrate a problem-solving attitude, not more than once, but they're going to show time and time again that they can do that. And then they're going to formulate a plan to solve a problem that uses a problem-solving attitude. They're going to organize it in a way that's useful in their life. And then last, students going to display self-reliance by working independently over a long period of time. It becomes a little bit part of how they're going to operate in that endeavor. 5 levels, receiving to characterization, just like in Bloom's taxonomy, from the easiest to where it becomes easy and part of them. And psychomotor is sort of related in the same way. We go from imitation to naturalization, with imitation being the observation and the pattern of the behavior after somebody else's. It's simply mimicking. If you're going to show them how to shoot a foul shot with your elbow and your wrist flipping, you show and kids try as best as they can. If you're an art teacher and you go to 1st grade and you show them, you model a flower with 3 colors. Well, for 3rd grade or 1st grade, you're going to have all 25 flowers coming to you with the same color, with looking the same way. If you show them only one model, variation is needed for the younger the child, but they simply are going to copy, imitate the first skill level. And then they're going to be able to, at the next level, to manipulate it. They're going to create a work of their own. They know what it is. They're going to take the lesson and read it and perform a certain action by doing it. Here, they're going to be able to shoot a foul shot and make it or get close to the basket using proper form. And then they're going to refine it. They're going to get better at it and more exact. You might say a student will be able to make 5 out of 10 foul shots. They may not just have it just right, but they're working on it to get more precise. And then they're going to coordinate in the articulation phase, where they're going to start to have internal consistency, and where now a student will make 9 out of 10. They can do it maybe from different sides of the foul line. And then it becomes natural that if there's a high level performance, by closing your eyes you can make 9 out of 10 free throws, because it just becomes a part of the way you do it. I tried to teach my daughter how to drive a stick shift when she turned 16. Took her out to the high school parking lot. Thought this was going to be easy. My daughter was a cheerleader and was pretty athletic. No problem. I demonstrated to her on my little Honda Civic how it does it. Excellent teaching. Then modeled it several times, and we switched places. I brought my morning coffee with me, and doggone if I didn't lose that entire cup of coffee all over me the first time she tried that clutch. I learned that fathers cannot teach their daughters how to drive a stick shift. We went home both angry at one another, so I didn't even get past the imitation stage on that one. Well, let's put this into objectives. A student will be able to copy a golf swing. What level? Well, you're going to copy how a golf swing looks. Going to know how to hold it and swing it. And then they're going to get a little bit better at it. They're going to be able to manipulate it. Well, you're going to be able not just only to swing it, but you're going to be able to hit the golf ball off the golf tee. Lower level. And then you're going to get more precise. Your student will be able to get the golf ball airborne off the golf tee. And then you're going to not only be able to get it airborne, you're going to be able to hit the ball off the tee and keep it in the fairway for a considerable distance. And then lastly, you're going to do it consistently. The student will be able to consistently hit the golf ball off the tee and fairway for a considerable distance. So, psychomotor, skills from imitation to becoming part of you. Just like stick shift. After a couple of months of driving a stick shift car, you never lose. You could go right back. I could still drive that old car without much hesitation. It becomes naturalized part of you. There are two types of objectives, and we have those three taxonomies. Well, there's two ways to use those taxonomies to write objectives, and Runyan's objectives are broken down into learning outcomes, and this is what we typically use. We say a student will be able to understand, a student will define, will identify, will differentiate. It just tells what the student's outcome is going to be, what they're going to be able to do. Well, Mager says, well, let's add not only what they do, but under what conditions and at what level of performance. Let's define. And we use this for mastery learning typically. For example, given 6 primary colors, the students will be able to identify 5. Well, we know that then at mastery learning, to pass that objective, given 6 colors, he's going to have to be able to identify 5. I think that'd be easy for an 11th grader to do. From the required list of 10 words, students will spell correctly 9 of them. So your mastery of that spelling list would be, you can miss 1. If you miss 2, you're going to redo those words. And from the file line, student will be able to make 9 out of 10 baskets or 8 out of 10 baskets to be able to. So in Mager's objectives, you look at what students will do, under what conditions, and what level of performance we're going to expect them to do. Well, our objectives lead our lesson plans, whether they be in either one of the 2 forms, or cognitive, affective, or psychomotor. And they are the ones, they are the lead part of a lesson. Typically, a lesson plan will have several parts. The topic, then the student objectives, and sometimes you don't have all 3. You might just have a cognitive with 1 affective and no skills, but those are listed. You typically list the materials. Sometimes if you're going to direct instruction, you have an intro. Some will call it a set. And then you have your lesson plan telling you what the procedures or activities you're going to be, and then how you're going to close, what assignments you're going to give, and how you're going to evaluate the lesson. If we looked at it, it might look like this. Sometimes in districts that have benchmarks or goals, that goal is simply a statement that relates the subject matter content to a standard. All of you in Missouri are teaching to state standards. In Kansas, you're teaching to your district's curriculum standards. And if you are in math and science and those that are testing, many times what's adopted are the national standards. So there's some sort of standard you're going to be teaching to. And from that goal, broad goal, you will have 1, 2, 3 objectives that are going to be used to meet partially that big broad-based goal. And it tells students what they're going to be able to do, what they're going to know or feel at the end of the lesson. And typically we'll find in most lesson writings it's written such as a student will be able to. Third are the materials and equipment listed, because these are typically listed for a substitute to be able to follow. So you'd need to know what books to get, what materials you'd have to have on hand, and so those are listed there. And then the instructional procedures take most of the space. Yeah, many will put the time sequences down, but it's a description, sometimes written in sentence form, sometimes not, but describing exactly what you're going to do in the lesson, how you're going to introduce it, how you're going to actually teach. Many times you even see the questions listed that you're going to ask. You have a battery of questions, how you're going to close the lesson, what worksheets you're going to use if you have worksheets or technology. And I love to see you put estimated time limits to them to see, to give you a feel for how long that lesson's going going to go. And then you end with your assignment and how you're going to evaluate each of the objectives, because you always want to teach to the objective as you go through. How are you going to know what you said you were going to teach that kid at the end? That's what closure and evaluation is all about. When you are writing your work sample, if those of you in Kansas that have to complete a Kansas performance appraisal, they have one addition to their lesson plan format. They, of course, have the objectives, the instructional activities, and then how you're going to assess those objectives. But they add adaptations. How are you going to modify their plans for special children? What accommodations or modifications are you going to use for any of your children that are identified or 504 or even not identified? If you just have one or two slow readers, are there going to be any adaptations that will need to be considered as that lesson is taught? If you looked at a Hunter lesson plan, which we're going to do in another lesson, but that's one of the models of direct instruction. Rosenshine's model is another, but it would look something like this. Briefly, there's your standard being taught, your curriculum goal, your benchmark, many different ways we describe that. But this lesson is going to cover these three objectives. They're going to be able to graph quadratic equations. They're going to determine if a graph opens up or down, and they're going to be solving equations by graphing. So three sub-objectives to that major benchmark, that they'll be able to graph a parabola. So the materials are going to meet. They're going to need a hat and some objects and some tennis balls, a graphing calculator, overhead hookup for the calculator, graphing calculator for each student. So you tell the sub what they're going to have to get ready for that day. And then the anticipatory set, he's going to have a neat little way to introduce this with a funny hat and acting like a court gesture and juggling three items to capture their kids' attention, ask them to draw the path of the ball, and have one go to the board and the like. But an interesting way to show parabolas, and then we get into actually the instructional input, telling them about the shape that they saw that was drawn. Notice even using questions here, but that gets into a little bit more detail, even talking about the formula, and a lot of times in math you even see some, especially in the modeling, the examples that they're going to use here graphed, and you're going to have three different problems that he's going to model on the board for them. Then he's going to check for understanding by brainstorming different calculations. Here's his equations that he's going to use. Then he's going to put the kids on guided practice where they're going to solve three problems on their own. And then independent practice. If he feels that 80% of them can do 80 or 90% correct, they'll put them on independent practice for homework, where he's going to give them 15 problems to do. And then he would have the assessment and the accommodations listed for those kids that maybe need special help also afterwards. A more detailed lesson plan. This is one that I'm not going to go over this one with you, but again, it's by standards. These are the curriculum standards. These are the benchmarks of those standards. These are the indicators, which they would in this district call the objectives. Here are the materials. And notice she's going to use quite 12 different, this is a 90-minute block class, and so he's going to have 9 different activities to review. So I think review for a test, but 9 different ways to review. And all spelled out well enough that a substitute could follow. Typically, as you develop as a teacher, you're going to get a book like this, and this is how you're going to fill out your lesson plans. They will be, I'm going to do problems, blah, 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 objectives. And you're many times you don't even write out the objectives because you're in a curriculum-based curriculum, and or an objective-based curriculum, and so you write just a number of the objective that you're teaching to today, and then how you're going to get there. This is how most teachers will, after they've taught for 3 or 4 years, complete their lesson plans. But no matter if you've taught for 10 years, for 20 years, you know, you could have the best lesson plan in the world work for you, but stuff happens. Love this. Love this little. Let's see it again. We'll go back out. Kind of things trip you up all the time, and so you might have a first period. This works super for this lesson plan, but then second period announcement comes over and just throws your class in chaos. So your best laid plans sometimes go awry. Well, what are some models that we find very popular? Later on, we're going to talk more about these models specifically that we typically find. The Hunter lesson plan is an excellent model for teaching lower level cognitive knowledge bases, where you have an A set, which is a short 1 to 5 minute little activity. Sometimes it will have the student focus on something to introduce the lesson. And then the objective and purpose, you tell kids what you're going to learn today and why. And why is a very important part. Now, a lot of times in effective schools, you write that objective on the board, because kids will always enter your class and say, what are we going to do today, teach? And you don't have to say anything, because your objective is right on the board. And if you teach to the test and test what you teach, the objective should be your test. So you tell kids to write it in their book, and that will be their test. And at the end of the class, ask to see if they can do that objective. But you tell them what they're going to learn, and the big part is why. And if you don't have a good answer to why do I have to learn this, then ask yourself, why are you teaching it? So see if you can come up with a better answer than I had to learn it, so you're going to learn it. The instructional input is where you teach it. You're going to, a lot of times it'll be direct instruction. You're going to stuff the kids' heads with knowledge. It could be in any way, shape, or form. It could be a video. It could be a lecture. It could be a PowerPoint. It could be any way of giving them that information. And then once you've given them what they need to know, you're going to show them. And you're going to model it for them. You're going to, if it's an art lesson, you're going to show them some end products of the art project they're going to do. If it's a dissection, you're going to show them what the final dissection looks like. If it's a math problem, you're going to work a couple of math problems for them. If it's Madeline Hunter's lesson plan, you're going to be able, if my objective is you're going to be able to say the Hunter lesson plan backwards and forwards before you leave, you would model it. Well, it's an anticipatory set, then the objective and purpose, instructional input, modeling, checking for understanding, guided practice, independent practice, and closure. Then you go from closure, independent practice, guided practice, check for understanding, modeling, instructional input, objective and purpose, and anticipatory set. You model for the students what you want to do. If it's a proper way of making a free throw, you show them how to do it. And if you can't do it, get somebody that properly can. And this fifth thing you do, you check for understanding. You can use, and we're going to show you 50 different strategies you can use here, but do they understand it? And not just one person, but you want to find out if every kid in there has got it. Because if they don't, you're going to have to reteach. But you don't want to go to guided practice until you know that every kid knows that information up to a certain point. And so once you kind of know they've got it, you work the room, you give them so many problems, and here you tell kids and put them on the clock exactly how much time they got to get so many problems done, or the worksheet done, or whatever game you're going to play. But however you're going to have them practice it, you put them on the clock and you work the room. And then independent practice is where they practice on their own. Another way of saying this, it's homework. What are they going to do to practice? And you want them to does practice make perfect? Well, no, it doesn't. Practice makes permanent. So what you actually want is perfect practice makes perfect. So you want them to be able to do it right if they take it home. So independent practice, that's why you do the guided practice and check for understanding, so when they leave, they do it right. And then closure, just like you started with class, you're going to wrap it up. And the last thing that kids leave in elementary school, this would be a great thing to do with them, because as soon as they get in the car with their mom, what's the question going to be asked? Or the question at the dinner table will, what did you learn today? And your universal response is nothing. So if you have a closure or wrap up where you might ask them, tell me what you've learned today, and ask each student one thing that they've learned, a lot better probability that you're going to have an answer at dinner time. The multiple intelligence lesson plan has a lot of the same types of components. However, under instructor activities, you will teach to at least 7 of the intelligences, so that kids learn it in different modalities, either linguistically, or logically, or visually, or kinesthetically, or working with others interpersonally, or reflecting it, internalizing it, or through seeing what rhythms and use music. And we're going to explain how those things work and give you a myriad of ideas later on down the line. Unit plans typically are the collection of lesson plans to get you to a unit. Typically a unit has the title of the unit, the overview, why it's being taught, and the rationale, what the major objectives are, and then the unit materials that you're going to need to complete the unit, how the unit's going to be evaluated, that is, what percentages of the grade are going to be for this and this and this, and then what's your timetable, how many days will it take, it's a 7-day, 2 weeks, and then the daily lesson plans that go with it. And these units can be found all over the internet for you. Books produce them for you. If you buy a textbook, they're almost always by units, and we'll provide all of that lesson planning for you. But no matter if the textbook does it for you, if you do it yourself, sometimes these things happen. Well, that wasn't me, but sometimes you feel like that as your lesson plan flops. I wish every lesson plan went perfect, but sometimes they don't. But one of the things I think can help make things fly a little bit better is the use of technology to get your lesson plans going. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. In fact, you probably can't reinvent the wheel because it's already been invented. So go to the lesson plan pages, and we're going to have another section on this later, but so I'm not going to hit this hard, but almost any lesson plan that you need can be found someplace on the internet, and the lesson plans page is a great place to start to find what you need. If you need some PowerPoints for your unit or lesson plan, they're already done for you, and some of them are just fantastic. PowerPoints are great ways to keep you on task, so you teach to the objective. It allows you to not have to think about exactly what's coming next, but to focus on the questions and discussions that you're going to follow. And kids typically like them because they can see things, and many are visual learners rather than auditory, and so they can see it as well as hear you. Videos, music, audio reinforcements, all help in using the senses to move something from short-term to long-term memory. All of those things can be found on the internet, different sites. Music is a great stimulus for controlling mood, and you can use them before class, after class, as they exit. A lot of teachers will use them during cooperative learning, during the movement time, or even as elevator music behind small group discussions. Coaches have always used music to Ray's production. Weight rooms are famous for their rock and roll and heavy beat. Businesses use it to sell you more produce. You just don't know it's there, but it's in the background. If you're interested in that, the Little Green Book is an excellent resource. It lists all the songs by what they're about. And if you are going to teach about Renaissance art, there show all the songs that you could download from iTunes that would have to do with Renaissance art. It's an amazing way to pick music. When you combine them with PowerPoints, fantastic way to use an ASET or a closure for an activity. For example, if I was teaching the Civil War and slavery, I might, as they walk into the class, show a video just like this.
How do you know, where did it all go wrong? Can I embrace the perfect stranger? How do you know, where did it all go wrong? 'Cause lately, could you tell, I lost the only one. Could you tell? Stop.
Well, you get the picture. But it would stimulate an interest in what you're going to talk about today, the reasons for the Civil War, perhaps. But that might be used as an ASET. But you can use them during class to break up the monotony, to visualize something, and to attach an emotion to your subject. Because we tend to find that kids remember things if they are emotionally attached. And our music was the way we taught people. In fact, the very first way you learn the ABCs, I'll bet, was with the ABC song. And so sometimes we forget that as we move up the grade levels, that music can be used in a very positive way to connect. Beowulf was a story of Anglo-Saxon passed down by the oral tradition. We wrote it down. It's not quite as interesting, but much of the early literature was done through song or through story. Videos now are just immensely popular with kids because they're a TV generation, and you can get these almost anywhere.
This nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We all.
When I began teaching, and I taught speech class, I had to have a record of this. But here I can pick almost any language. This one I think is German. But I can start a class discussion. In speech class, I can just bring in almost all kinds of demonstrations in history. Fantastic array of videos available to you. And they're all on the internet through different, and we have a whole nother section on where you can find those. But you can bring the real world into the classroom. And kids respond to this rather than sitting and listening to you. If you want to make them your own, because I know in many of the school districts you're at, you can't get to YouTube. Sometimes it's blocked. You can use Zamzar or Media Convert and then make them into MP4 files or whatever kind of computer you have. You can convert them and they're yours, and you can keep them for as long as you want. Because anything on YouTube is public domain, and so can be used. Your textbook companies now are producing all kinds of videos for you to use. Greenbush or any local educational laboratory or center has a whole library of things that you can borrow or use or download. Videos are a fantastic way to break up the monotony of you talking. Gaming also tremendous way to bring your lesson plan alive, especially to summarize all of the games that are computerized that you can put on your smartboard or screen are easy to fashion by just adding the questions. They're what we call shells, and they're a lot of fun. In elementary school, we had a lot of fun. We played by learning games. Well, we can do the same thing with a high school senior and even a graduate student. To find all this stuff, one of the best places until you get to the section on, we're going to cover a bunch of different sites to show you all the things you can, the tools you can use in another section. But Sites for Teachers would be a good place to start to find out literally hundreds of websites that teachers could use to download almost anything they could possibly use in a classroom. So lesson planning is so much easier than it was when I started in the early 70s. I had to kind of invent my own a lot of times, or what drove the lessons were not what we wanted to teach a lot of times, but they were businessmen. They were the ones that owned the textbooks, and we talked to the texts. And so a lot of times they weren't really written for what our school's focus was about or our community was about, and so they drove the curriculum. A lot of times now state curriculums, testing programs drive the curriculum, but you still have quite a lot of freedom into how you teach those outcomes and those benchmarks. So don't be one of these guys when it comes to lesson planning and teaching.
When I become a teacher, I want to lecture all day long.
I want to prevent change.
I want to be the sage on the stage.
When I become a teacher, I wish to maintain the bell-shaped curve.
I think spell check's for wimps.
I want to teach to the test.
When I become a teacher,
I want to be able to chew gum all day and tell my students they can't.
I want to retire next year and it just doesn't matter anymore.
When I become a teacher, I want to sit in the teacher's lounge and complain.
I'm going to teach 1 year, 25 times.
When I become a teacher, I want a computer just to record grades. I want to keep my mouth shut and wait to become an administrator.
When I become a teacher,
I want to cover rather than uncover material and use chalk.
When I become a teacher, I want to quit learning.
Don't be like those guys. In fact, I'm saving my chalk because I think it'll be a relic someday. Well, let's close. When it comes to lesson planning, I love this little maxim. If you don't know where you're going, any road's going to get you there. And that's what you do in lesson planning. That's what you do with objectives. You do it at home. You do it in your planning time. But planning is done at your seat, and once you get into the game, you change your game plan sometimes. You make those decisions on your feet. The longer you teach, the more different directions, alternatives you're going to have. And learning doesn't take place in presets, blocks of times. You're going to find out, if you haven't already. It never goes always as you plan. And so if you plan, if you teach and you adjust, you're going to be just fine. But planning is the basis. It is where you gain the confidence and security to know where you're going. So planning is an integral part in being any great teacher. And my challenge to you as we end, and it's the 21st challenge, with our kids coming to us being digital learners, you're going to have to develop more relevant and engaging and authentic lessons that just aren't what they used to be. They've got to have that rich audio, that unique videos, those vivid images, and to bring alive that material to the kids sitting in front of you, because they are a computer generation with computer games. They are the smartest generation we've ever had coming up, and you're going to have to work smarter, not harder, to engage them. So I challenge you to use a technology that is every day changing to make your lessons the best they can be.